Ambassador Jinwoo Park sat quietly in his assigned seat within the massive crystal chamber that floated in the darkness of space. The Galactic Council building was unlike anything he had ever seen on Earth. Walls made of clear crystal stretched up so high that he could barely see the ceiling. Stars twinkled through the transparent surfaces, making him feel like he was sitting inside a giant diamond floating among the cosmos. Around him sat hundreds of alien beings from across the galaxy. Some looked almost human, but with different colored skin or extra arms. Others were so strange that Jinwoo still felt his heart skip a beat when he looked at them. They were tall, thin creatures with long necks that reminded him of giraffes. Bug-like beings with hard shells and multiple eyes clicked and buzzed as they talked to each other. Floating balls of light that he had learned were called nebulons drifted above their special seats. Jinwoo had been Earth's ambassador to the Galactic Council for only 3 months. Everything still felt new and overwhelming. The other species had been traveling between stars for thousands of years, while humans had only joined the galactic community recently. Most of the time, Jinwoo felt like a child trying to understand adult conversations. The chamber began to grow quiet as a massive door at the far end started to open. Jinwoo felt the temperature in the room seem to drop. All around him, the alien delegates shifted nervously in their seats. Some of the smaller creatures actually began to tremble. The bug-like Chitauri, who Jinwoo had thought were fierce warriors, suddenly looked down at the floor. Through the enormous doorway stepped King Vorthak the Merciless. Jinwoo had seen pictures of the Tyrant King, but nothing had prepared him for seeing the creature in person. Vorthak stood nearly 4 meters tall with a body covered in black scales that gleamed like polished metal. His head was dragon-like with glowing yellow eyes and teeth as long as Jinwoo's fingers. Massive claws extended from his hands, and his tail swept behind him as he walked. The most frightening thing about King Vorthak was not his size or his weapons. It was the way every other being in the chamber reacted to him. These were species that had mastered incredible technology. The Zephyrians had learned to bend space and time. The Chitauri had conquered dozens of worlds. The Nebulons could travel through dimensions that humans could not even imagine. Yet all of them bowed their heads when Vorthak entered the room. Jinwoo watched in amazement as creatures who had seemed so powerful and advanced suddenly acted like scared children. The Zephyrian delegate, who had been giving wise advice just minutes before, now sat with his elongated head pressed down toward his chest. The Chitauri warriors, with their sharp claws and armored bodies, clicked nervously and avoided looking at the king. Vorthak walked slowly to the center of the chamber, where a raised platform waited for him. His yellow eyes scanned the assembly like a predator looking for prey. When his gaze passed over Jinwoo, the human felt a chill run down his spine. Those eyes held no mercy, no kindness, no trace of anything that Jinwoo would recognize as civilized behavior. The king's voice boomed through the chamber when he finally spoke. "Subjects of the galaxy," he said. And Jinwoo noticed that even his voice made some of the smaller aliens cringe. "You will hear my words and you will obey them without question." Jinwoo had learned enough about galactic politics to know that King Vorthak ruled the Draconian Empire, which controlled hundreds of star systems. The king had built his power through fear and violence. Entire civilizations had been destroyed for refusing his demands. Planets had been burned to ash for showing the slightest sign of rebellion. What shocked Jinwoo was how completely the other council members accepted this treatment. These were supposed to be the representatives of free worlds, yet they acted like prisoners waiting for their sentence. Some of them had been fighting for freedom in their home systems for centuries, but here they sat in silence. The plant-like Floranian delegate, whose people were known for their peaceful nature and beautiful gardens, had tears running down her face before Vorthak even began speaking. The wise Zephyrians, who had helped establish the first laws of interstellar cooperation, stared at the floor like students being scolded by a cruel teacher. Jinwoo felt something growing inside his chest as he watched this display. It was not fear like the others felt. It was anger. Back on Earth, his grandfather had told him stories about standing up to bullies. His father had taught him that sometimes the right thing to do was also the hardest thing to do. As King Vorthak prepared to announce his latest demands, Jinwoo realized that he was looking at the biggest bully in the galaxy. And like all bullies, Vorthak had gotten his way for so long that he believed no one would ever challenge him. The young human ambassador took a deep breath and prepared to listen to what the Tyrant King had to say. He had a feeling that this day would change everything, not just for Earth, but for every free being in the galaxy. King Vorthak's massive claws scraped against the crystal podium as he began to speak. The sound was like nails on a chalkboard, making everyone in the chamber wince. His yellow eyes glowed brighter as he looked out over the terrified delegates. "I have new orders for all worlds under galactic protection," Vorthak announced, his voice carrying easily through the huge chamber. "Every planet must give up their defensive fleets within 1 month. All military ships will be handed over to my empire." Jinwoo felt his stomach drop. He knew what this meant. Without their own ships to protect them, these worlds would be completely helpless. They would have no way to defend themselves against pirates, hostile aliens, or worst of all, against Vorthak himself. Around the chamber, Jinwoo could see the shock on the faces of the other delegates. The Zephyrian ambassador's long neck trembled as he processed what he had just heard. The Chitauri warriors clicked their mandibles together rapidly. A sign Jinwoo had learned meant they were extremely upset. Even the floating nebulan lights dimmed noticeably, but none of them spoke up. None of them protested. Vorthak continued speaking, his voice getting louder and more demanding with each word. "Any world that refuses to comply will face immediate invasion. I will personally lead my fleet to destroy every city, every building, every trace of your civilization." The threat hung in the air like a dark cloud. Jinwoo had read reports about what happened to worlds that defied King Vorthak. Entire planets had been turned into lifeless rocks. Billions of innocent people had died simply because their leaders had tried to protect their freedom. "Furthermore," Vorthak said, his voice now filled with cruel satisfaction, "I have special plans for certain worlds that have been too comfortable for too long." The king's gaze moved across the chamber until it settled on a small section where the Floranian delegates sat. These were gentle, plant-like beings who had never hurt anyone. Their worlds were covered in beautiful gardens and peaceful cities. They had no armies, no weapons, no way to fight back against anyone. "The Floranian colonies will provide workers for my mining operations," Vorthak announced. "Their peaceful nature makes them perfect for slave labor. They will work in my deepest mines until they die." Jinwoo heard a soft crying sound and looked over at the Floranian section. Their main delegate, a being called Petal Singer, was weeping. Tears that looked like liquid diamonds fell from her large, gentle eyes onto the crystal floor. Her whole body shook with fear and sadness. The sight of Petal Singer crying made something burn inside Jinwoo's chest. He had met her several times since joining the council. She had been kind to him, helping him understand the complex rules of galactic politics. She had shown him pictures of her home world, with its floating gardens and crystal cities. Her people spent their lives creating beauty and growing food to share with other worlds. Now this monster wanted to turn them into slaves. Jinwoo looked around the chamber, hoping to see someone else getting ready to protest. Surely the wise Zephyrians would say something. Maybe the warrior Chitauri would stand up for the weak. Perhaps the advanced Nebulans would use their great knowledge to find a solution. But everyone sat in silence. Their heads were bowed, their eyes focused on the floor. Some were trembling with fear, others seemed frozen in shock, but none of them moved to help the crying Floranian delegate. "King," Vorthak noticed the silence and seemed pleased by it. "I see you all understand your place in my galaxy," he said with a laugh that sounded like grinding metal. "You will show proper respect to your king, or you will face the consequences." The tyrant's words echoed through the chamber, and Jinwoo realized that this was how it had been for centuries. Vorthak would make horrible demands, threaten innocent people, and everyone would just accept it. They had all become so afraid that they had forgotten how to fight back. Jinwoo thought about his grandfather, who had fought in wars to protect freedom. He thought about his father, who had stood up to corrupt bosses even when it cost him his job. He thought about all the humans throughout history who had refused to bow down to bullies and tyrants. As he looked at Petal Singer's tears and heard Vorthak's cruel laughter, Jinwoo felt his fear being replaced by something much stronger. It was the same feeling his ancestors had felt when facing impossible odds. It was the human refusal to accept injustice, even when fighting back seemed hopeless. The chamber remained deadly quiet except for the soft sound of pedal singers crying. Every alien delegate sat frozen in their seats, too scared to move or speak. They were waiting for someone else to act first, but no one was brave enough to take that step. Jin-Woo realized that if no one else would stand up to this bully, then he would have to do it himself. His heart was pounding and his hands were shaking, but he knew what he had to do. Slowly, very slowly, he began to rise from his seat. The simple act of standing up in that chamber of fear would change everything. The moment Jin-Woo stood up, the entire chamber seemed to freeze. It was as if time itself had stopped moving. Every alien delegate turned to look at the human ambassador who had dared to rise while King Vorthak was speaking. Some gasped softly, others made worried clicking sounds, and a few actually covered their eyes as if they could not bear to watch what would happen next. King Vorthak's glowing yellow eyes locked onto Jin-Woo immediately. The massive dragon-like creature had been mid-sentence when the human stood up, and now his words died in his throat. For a long moment, the two beings stared at each other across the crystal chamber. The Tyrant King towered above everyone else in the room, while Jin-Woo looked small and fragile by comparison. "Did I give you permission to stand, little creature?" Vorthak's voice was low and dangerous, like the rumble before an earthquake. Jin-Woo felt every eye in the chamber watching him. His heart was beating so fast he thought it might burst from his chest. His mouth felt dry and his hands were trembling, slightly. But he forced himself to take a step forward, then another, walking slowly toward the center of the chamber where Vorthak waited. "I am Ambassador Jin-Woo Park of Earth," he said, his voice much steadier than he felt inside. "I speak for my people and for every free being in this galaxy." A wave of shocked whispers swept through the assembly. The Zephyrian delegates leaned forward in their seats, their large eyes wide with disbelief. Several Chitauri warriors began clicking their mandibles rapidly, which Jin-Woo had learned was their way of showing extreme surprise. Vorthak laughed, but it was not a pleasant sound. It was like the roar of a volcano mixed with breaking glass. "The newest species in the galaxy dares to address me directly. Your people have been traveling in space for less than 100 years. You are nothing but primitive children playing with toys you do not understand." Jin-Woo took another step forward. He was now standing in the open space at the center of the chamber, completely exposed and vulnerable. Every alien in the room could see him clearly, and many were shaking their heads as if they thought he had lost his mind. "You are right that humans are new to space travel," Jin-Woo said calmly. "But we are not new to recognizing bullies when we see them, and we have never been good at bowing down to tyrants." The word tyrant hit the chamber like a lightning bolt. No one had dared to call King Vorthak by that name in centuries. Some delegates actually gasped out loud, while others looked around nervously as if expecting the ceiling to fall down on them. Vorthak's scales began to darken with rage. His massive claws extended fully, gleaming like polished knives in the crystal chamber's light. "You dare insult me? I have crushed entire civilizations that mastered the stars while your species was still discovering fire." "Then you should understand something about history," Jin-Woo replied, his voice growing stronger with each word. "Every tyrant in the history of every world eventually falls. They all think they are unbeatable until they meet someone willing to stand up to them." The human ambassador looked around the chamber at all the frightened faces watching him. "Earth formally rejects your authority over free worlds. We will not surrender our defenses, and we will not stand by while you enslave innocent people." Jin-Woo pointed toward the Floranian section where Petal Singer was still crying. "These gentle beings have done nothing to harm you or anyone else. They spend their lives creating beauty and growing food to share with others. If you think humans will watch you turn them into slaves, you are very wrong." The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs. Some delegates were whispering frantically to each other, while others sat in stunned silence. The Chitauri warriors were clicking so rapidly it sounded like a percussion instrument. Even some of the nebulan lights began to pulse brighter, which Jin-Woo had learned meant they were excited or agitated. King Vorthak was so angry that small flames began to flicker around his nostrils. His tail lashed back and forth behind him, and his claws scraped deep grooves in the crystal floor. "You insignificant worm! I will crush you and your entire pathetic planet." But Jinwoo did not back down. Instead, he took another step forward, moving even closer to the enraged king. "Go ahead and try," he said quietly. "But know this, you will not face just Earth alone. Every being you have terrorized, every world you have conquered, every dream you have crushed will be watching, and they will remember that someone finally said no to you." For the first time in centuries, other voices began to stir in the chamber. The Zephyrian delegate whispered something to his neighbor. A Chitauri warrior nodded his head slowly. Even some of the smaller, more timid species began to sit up straighter in their seats. Vorthak noticed the change immediately. His yellow eyes swept across the assembly, seeing something he had never seen before. The first tiny sparks of defiance beginning to grow in hearts that had known only fear for too long. "You will pay for this insolence with your life," Vorthak roared, his voice shaking the entire chamber. Jinwoo stood his ground, ready to face whatever came next. King Vorthak's rage filled the crystal chamber like a storm. His massive body expanded as he reared up to his full, terrifying height. Flames danced around his teeth and his claws scraped against the floor, leaving deep marks in the crystal surface. The sound was like grinding metal, making everyone in the chamber cover their ears. "You pathetic human," Vorthak roared, his voice so loud that some of the smaller aliens fell from their seats. "I challenge you to single combat. When I tear your fragile body apart, your worthless species will learn to show proper respect." Jinwoo felt his blood turn cold. He had hoped his words might make the king think twice, but instead they had only made him angrier. Fighting this monster seemed impossible. Vorthak was 4 times taller than any human with natural weapons that could cut through steel. His scales were like armor, and his strength could crush a small spaceship. But as Jinwoo looked around the chamber, he saw something that gave him courage. The other delegates were no longer staring at the floor in fear. They were watching him, with something that looked like hope in their eyes. Petalsinger had stopped crying and was leaning forward in her seat. Even some of the Chitauri warriors were nodding their heads slightly, as if they approved of what he was doing. "I accept your challenge," Jinwoo said, his voice steady despite the fear racing through his body. "But I want everyone here to know something. I do not fight just for Earth. I fight for every being you have terrorized, every world you have conquered, every innocent life you have destroyed." The chamber began to change around them. Ancient technology built into the walls activated, creating a perfect sphere of energy that would serve as their fighting arena. This energy field would also broadcast the combat across the entire galaxy, letting billions of beings watch as their tyrant king faced his first real challenge in centuries. Jinwoo stepped into the arena, feeling very small and alone. He had no weapons except his mind and his determination. Vorthak entered from the other side, his massive form taking up nearly half the fighting space. The king's yellow eyes glowed, with cruel satisfaction as he looked at his tiny opponent. "You cannot win, little human," Vorthak said, his voice now filled with cold confidence instead of rage. "I have killed thousands of warriors stronger than you. Your death will be quick, but very painful." Jinwoo did not reply. Instead, he was thinking about everything he knew about King Vorthak. During his months as ambassador, he had studied recordings of the king's past battles. He had watched videos of Vorthak fighting other creatures, looking for any weakness he could find. What Jinwoo had noticed was that Vorthak always fought the same way. The king was so confident in his strength and size that he had become predictable. He would charge forward with overwhelming force, expecting his opponents to panic and make mistakes. It had worked for centuries because everyone was too scared to think clearly when facing him. But humans had learned long ago that sometimes the best way to beat a bigger opponent was not to fight their strength, but to use their own power against them. Vorthak charged across the arena with a roar that shook the entire chamber. His massive claws were extended and his teeth were bared, ready to tear Jinwoo apart. The human waited until the last possible second, then rolled to the side as fast as he could move. The king's momentum carried him past Jinwoo and into the arena wall. The impact was so hard that cracks appeared in the energy barrier. Vorthak spun around quickly, his eyes now burning with embarrassment as well as anger. "Hold still and die like a warrior," Vorthak shouted, charging again. But Jinwoo was already moving. He had spent his whole life playing sports and staying in shape, and now that training served him well. Every time Vorthak attacked, Jinwoo was somewhere else. He rolled under the king's claws, jumped over his sweeping tail, and ducked beneath his snapping jaws. The watching delegates began to murmur with amazement. They had never seen anyone survive more than a few seconds against King Vorthak, but this small human had been fighting for several minutes and had not been hit even once. Vorthak was getting tired and frustrated. His attacks were becoming wilder and less controlled. Sweat was dripping from his scales and his breathing was getting heavier. He had expected this fight to be over in seconds, but now he was working harder than he had in years. Jinwoo could see that his strategy was working. He kept moving, staying just out of reach, letting the king wear himself down with his own anger and pride. Each time Vorthak missed an attack, he became more careless with the next one. Finally, after 20 minutes of this deadly dance, Vorthak stumbled. He had put all his strength into one final attack, but Jinwoo had dodged it easily. The king was off balance, breathing hard, and for the first time in the fight, he looked vulnerable. Jinwoo saw his chance and took it. Using a simple but effective technique his grandfather had taught him, he swept Vorthak's legs and sent the massive Tyrant crashing to the arena floor. The chamber fell completely silent as King Vorthak lay defeated. The silence in the crystal chamber lasted for what felt like forever. King Vorthak lay on the arena floor, his massive body still and quiet. His yellow eyes had lost their fierce glow, and for the first time in centuries, the Tyrant looked small and defeated. Jinwoo stood over him, breathing heavily but victorious. Then something amazing happened. One single voice broke the silence. It was Petal Singer, the gentle Floranian delegate who had been crying just an hour before. She stood up from her seat and began to clap her hands together. The sound echoed through the chamber like music. Within seconds, other delegates began to join her. The Zephyrian ambassador rose to his full height and added his voice to the applause. The Chitauri warriors clicked their mandibles in approval, creating a rhythm that mixed with the clapping. Even the floating nebulan lights began to pulse brighter and brighter, their way of showing joy and excitement. Soon the entire chamber was filled with the sound of celebration. Beings who had sat in terrified silence for centuries were now cheering loudly for the small human who had done what they thought was impossible. Jinwoo looked around at all the happy faces and felt tears forming in his eyes. But the real change was just beginning. As news of King Vorthak's defeat spread across the galaxy through the broadcast system, something incredible started to happen on worlds throughout the stars. People who had lived in fear for generations suddenly realized that their tormentor was not unbeatable after all. Back in the council chamber, the delegates were experiencing their own awakening. The Zephyrian ambassador was the first to speak up after the cheering died down. "For too long, we have allowed fear to control our decisions," he said, his wise voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "This human has shown us that courage is not about being fearless. It is about doing what is right even when you are afraid." The Chitauri war chief stood up next, his armored body gleaming in the crystal light. "My people are warriors, but we forgot how to fight for what matters. We offer our ships and our strength to protect any world that needs defending." Petal Singer stepped forward, her tears now gone and replaced by a gentle smile. "The Floranian colonies have always believed in peace, but we have learned that sometimes peace must be protected. We will share our knowledge of growing food and healing plants with any world that asks." One by one, delegates from across the galaxy began to stand and speak. The aquatic mere people offered to help clean polluted oceans on damaged worlds. The silicon-based rock folk promised to help rebuild cities destroyed by tyrants. The energy beings volunteered to share their advanced technology with species that needed better defenses. Jinwoo watched in amazement as the chamber transformed before his eyes. These same beings who had been too frightened to speak just hours before were now eagerly volunteering to help each other. The fear that had kept them apart was being replaced by hope and cooperation. The Zephyrian ambassador called for order and addressed the assembly. I propose that we form a new organization, not a council ruled by fear, but an alliance built on friendship and mutual support. We will call it the Free Worlds Alliance. The vote was unanimous. Every single delegate raised their hand or tentacle or wing to show their agreement. For the first time in galactic history, hundreds of different species were choosing to work together as equals instead of bowing to a single ruler. Over the following weeks, the changes spread throughout the galaxy like ripples in a pond. Worlds that had been forced to pay tribute to King Vorthak declared their independence. Species that had never talked to each other before began sharing technology and resources. Pirates and other criminals found themselves facing united fleets instead of scattered, frightened victims. Jinwoo found himself at the center of it all. Despite Earth being one of the newest members of the galactic community, the other species looked to humans for leadership. They had seen what one brave human could accomplish, and they wanted to learn from that example. 6 months after the confrontation, Jinwoo stood before the transformed council chamber to address the first official meeting of the Free Worlds Alliance. The room looked completely different now. Where once there had been empty seats for species too afraid to attend, now every spot was filled with eager delegates. The crystal walls seemed brighter, reflecting the hope and energy of the beings gathered inside. When I first came to this chamber, Jinwoo began, his voice warm and confident, I saw hundreds of advanced civilizations living in fear of one bully. Today, I see partners and friends working together to build something better than any of us could create alone. He paused and looked around at all the different faces watching him. We have proven that no single being, no matter how powerful, can stand against the united will of free people. We are no longer subjects bowing to a tyrant. We are partners in the greatest adventure the galaxy has ever known. The applause that followed was even louder than the celebration after Vorthak's defeat. It echoed through the crystal chamber and out into space, carrying with it the promise of a new era where tyranny would never again hold power over the free beings of the stars. The age of fear was over. The age of cooperation had begun.